Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. What have I been telling you every single day, twice a day, with live streams on this channel? This is the reason we're at 266. We're almost at 267,000 subscribers. We're on our way to 300,000 subs. It's because of you, ladies and gentlemen. I focus on the stock market, and I focus on the Supreme Court, and of course, President Trump, and November, and the future of this country. BBC, Associated Press, Time Magazine, Donald Trump criminal sentencing delayed until after November. Judge delays Donald Trump sentencing and hush money case until after November. Time Magazine, Trump, New York, hush money sentencing delayed until after November. Did I not tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court has basically given Trump yet another victory? I told you, ladies and gentlemen, and hit subscribe. You will hear in a couple of seconds analysis on the market, the economy, and everything going on with the fact that the Supreme Court gave Trump another victory. They gave him the immunity victory, which factored into the evidence presented with the unconstitutional, that led to the unconstitutional conviction. The state of New York cannot level a federal crime at anyone, Trump included, without the federal government involved. The federal government was literally not involved in the alleged federal crimes Trump committed. The FEC dropped the hush money case. The DOJ did not indict Trump, and the DOJ is indicting everyone around Trump, and they're trying to intimidate, and yet they still didn't indict Trump on FEC laws. Why is that? Because he didn't break any FEC laws. Former FEC chairman Hanze von Spakovsky, Trey Traynor, Bradley Smith, they all stated categorically Trump could have paid Stormy with dollar bills. It would not have been a campaign violation. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. This was a huge victory by the Supreme Court. The judge in New York decided not to sentence Trump because the moment, and we'll get to this in a little while, but the moment that he gets sentenced, and Russell, thank you to my super chat, thank you. The moment, ladies and gentlemen, high tones, hello in the Philippines, hello everyone, thank you so very much. The second, if Trump were to get sentenced, the Supreme Court would overturn the conviction immediately. That second. And I kept telling you, ladies and gentlemen, so hit subscribe. I have been like 5 for 5 on everything that I have been predicting and saying pertaining to the Supreme Court. Let's listen to the fact that this has been postponed forever, essentially.
This is some breaking news coming from the New York City courts. Judge Juan Marchand, who has been the presiding judge over former President Trump's so-called hush money case, has made a determination that he is not going to go ahead with the September 18th sentencing date for the former president, that it will be delayed until after the election. This had been a really fraught decision for this judge because people had observed, Sandra, that if he had have gone ahead with the sentencing, then the former president could have accused him of meddling in an election. And if he decided to delay the sentencing until after the election, no doubt he would get hit by a lot of accusations that he was acting in Donald Trump's political interests as opposed to in the interests of justice. But the breaking news coming to us just a couple of minutes ago, Judge Juan Marchand, the presiding judge in the so-called hush money case with Stormy Daniels, has decided to delay the sentencing for the former president until after the November election. This is a big decision, Sandra.
That means essentially forever. Trump will win. I don't think there's really any chance Trump loses. I don't. I don't think that unrealized taxes on unrealized gains, which is what Harris wants, price fixing, which is the Soviet Union tried that. It led to economic collapse, rampant inflation, high interest rates, record highs in credit card debt, a really terrible underlying economy. Corporate profits are up, but once they decline and the stock market crash or collapse is basically about a month or so away, I think, We're talking about a recession, ladies and gentlemen, which cements Trump's victory because people are not going to choose continued economic collapse. But it comes at a financial cost because of so much 4 years of mismanagement. I mean, there's a reason that interest rates are so high and yet inflation keeps going up. It's because of economic mismanagement. The Inflation Reduction Act did not work. Inflation still went up. It was at 9% in 2022. They said, well, it was just temporary. But the Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen, and the market, the two things you have to concern yourself with before November. I think both of them have secured Trump's victory. He's going to win. I just don't see Harris winning. I don't believe the polls. I think they're just public relations nonsense. You look, ladies and gentlemen, this was the only trial that could have derailed Trump. They are so utterly inept, Democrats, that when they go after Trump and indict him under 1 million charges, nothing sticks. Why do you think that is? He's either guilty and he's committed all of these crimes, or Democrats are going after him in the most apoplectic, sinister manner. And they can't get Trump. Why can't they get Trump? Because he didn't commit any of these crimes. If Trump was guilty of anything, he would have been imprisoned long ago. Okay, it's Democrats who, with secret servers and laptops, they're the ones that do everything possible to hide actual criminal behavior. But if Trump was actually guilty of anything, he would have been imprisoned a long time ago. Even the Republican establishment wanted to get Trump. The man is probably the cleanest politician we've ever had. The entire American political system is after this man. Media, virtually all of media, and still they can't get him. He's like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of politics. Why? Because he didn't commit the crimes. Okay, if you commit the crime, do the time. But he didn't commit the crimes. That's why all of these things are collapsing. Just like, unfortunately, the stock market, which I hope it doesn't, but I think it might very well.
Obviously, the implications of the timing is huge, considering the upcoming election, November 26th, many days and weeks after Election Day. So this just in, and we're going to get brand new reactions shortly. Obviously, we're talking about the judge overseeing former President Donald Trump's hush money trial. This has obviously taken center stage to many other cases we've been watching this week. But the sentencing now.
By the way, I'm looking at MSNBC to the right here, and they tried to spin this. It's the worst possible outcome for Trump. Why Trump's sentencing a delay may make confinement more likely. Yeah, this was the absolute worst outcome for Democrats. They wanted to sentence Trump before November. They wanted to influence people, the electorate, before November. They failed even at that. And this was all about influencing the electorate. You'd have to be a complete and utter imbecile not to realize what's going on. And this was the only chance, because it was a state conviction. And it would have been difficult for the Supreme Court to get involved, but they would have immediately had sentencing actually taken place. Because they already ruled Trump cannot be convicted for official acts. And you had former staffers, you had former lawyers speaking to him while he was president, and that was part of the evidence against him. But he didn't even commit a crime. The FEC dropped the hush money case for a reason, because he didn't commit. The FEC actually fined the Clinton campaign and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier with campaign money, which was actually breaking the law. And so, as always, it's the Democrats that actually commit the crime, but they want Trump to do the time. Okay, that rhymes, but let's continue.
Now, John, delayed to November 26 as we learn brand new details.
The former president was speaking to this just a little while ago at his New York City Trump Tower headquarters, saying that this was a deal, that there was nothing that was wrong with it legally, Now, don't forget that the Manhattan District Attorney decided to bootstrap that case, which would have been a misdemeanor, to the commission of, or possible commission of, a federal crime, election interference, or at least affecting the outcome of an election, and turned that into a felony. And in doing that, he got around the statute of limitations. And the jury came back with the verdict that the former president was guilty on all counts. But we're not going to learn about the penalty that will be imposed in this case, if a penalty is imposed at all, until.
By the way, the entire premise of left-leaning ideology, liberal ideology, progressive ideology, one of the basic tenets, one of the fundamental themes is that the American justice system is unfair. Now, I'm not trying to say that Trump has experienced the same things as other people. What I'm saying is the tenet of left-leaning ideology is that the system is unfair, and even juries oftentimes make mistakes and convict the wrong people. That's a left-leaning viewpoint, except it's not when it's Trump. With Trump, they jettison all their alleged values and go after him. They throw everything, including the kitchen sink, and it doesn't work. Why do you think it doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen? Because he didn't commit a crime, and Democrats are just going after him in a manner they would refer to as authoritarian. If he went after, and he should engage in reciprocal behavior, but if he indicts them, oh my God, they'll call him a totalitarian, and they'll forget that months earlier they were trying to imprison him.
Sometime after the election. And if the former president wins the election, Sandra, that could potentially change the outcome of literally everything.
All right, if you're just tuning in now, we just got word that the judge in this hush money case has delayed former President Donald Trump's hush money sentencing until after the election. You can see the date on your screen there is November 26th. John, just looking at the court document here and making my way through it to see if there's any further details that would be pertinent. But obviously the news is that this will be happening after the election. John, there will obviously be political debate and conversation around this in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, there's no question. Again, as I said, the decision by the judge was fraught, and he probably is going to face criticism no matter what decision he made. Again, if he had decided to go ahead with the sentencing and even sentenced former President Trump to jail time, which a lot of people thought would be the outcome of this, then there would be a great hue and cry from the Trump campaign and his supporters that this was the judicial system interfering in politics, but that if he waited, he would probably get a lot of criticism from Democrats saying, well, wait a second, this was supposed to be examining the rule of law and carrying out the rule of law, not taking into consideration the political fortunes of a presidential candidate.
Joining us now by phone is Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, jump on in here on the breaking news as the former president, we know, as we learned weeks ago, moved to delay the sentencing for this hush money scheme until after Election Day, and it looks like the judge has decided to do so. Your reaction?
Yes, and forgive the bells in the background. I'm on campus. It's not signaling this opinion. The decision is not surprising in two respects. One is, it was always controversial to have the sentencing before the election, and the judge clearly did not feel comfortable that he was ready to do so. But the second reason is the reason for that discomfort. The Supreme Court decision presented some very serious questions about this trial, and the judge knew he would be subject to an appellate review. It's clear that parts of the trial did run afoul of the Supreme Court decision. He allowed testimony of people like Hope Hicks to be entered, and that clearly fell within.
So in addition to the fact there was no jurisdiction, a state cannot level a federal charge at anyone without the federal government involved. The federal government was not involved. They dropped the hush money case, but the evidence utilized against Trump, and by the way, to my super chat, thank you, Arlene. Thank you so very much. Paul, thank you. the evidence, quote unquote, leveled against Trump was evidence of him speaking to a lawyer, a staffer, while he was president. Democrats, in their maniacal attempt to try to weaken the presidency, to try to harm Trump, to try to just go after him, actually made Trump stronger. When he becomes president, he's actually stronger and shielded from criminal liability if he is engaged in official acts. An official act is what? A speech. An official act is speaking to a staffer or advisor. An official act is speaking to a lawyer. I mean, they made him even more powerful, thank God.
The privileged aspect of the immunity decision. So he has to essentially get this cat to walk backwards. He has got to try to find a way that that evidence could be excluded, but the ultimate outcome be accepted. That's not as easy as people suggest. And he's got to create a record for that can withstand appellate review. So I think that the judge here is following the most cautious possible approach to say, let's hold off. It'll give me more time to look at the implications of this, and let's proceed after the election.
So in terms of proceeding after the election, it looks like the new sentencing date is set for November the 26th. But let's not forget, Professor, that just before then, on November the 12th, which is 7 days after the election, the judge is going to make a decision on a motion to vacate the conviction because of the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity. So do you think that date, that November 12th date, also played into Merchan's decision here?
I think it does. I think that all of this is being weighed together. I think that he believes that he can deal with the full range of issues here in terms of the sentencing issues, but also the continued viability of the conviction itself in November. I think all of those things, they're insular questions, but they're related to some extent. And the fact is that the judge said earlier, sentencing if necessary, reflected the fact that he understands that there might not be any sentencing because there might not be any conviction. If he decides that the evidence in the trial corrupted the outcome. Now, many people are betting he will not reach that conclusion, but then he has to say why it did not corrupt the outcome, why it didn't taint the verdict. Hope Hicks and some of the evidence coming out of the White House at the trial must have had an impact on that jury. And she gave this very tearful testimony that received a lot of attention. And the prosecutors made reference to it in their closing argument. So you can't really separate these issues. I think that Merchan is giving himself a little bit of cushion of time. So he will make sure that when he issues all of these rulings, he's ready for an appellate review.
To that point, just reading through the letter from the judge, signed by the judge, in reference to the defendant requesting an adjournment of his sentencing that was currently scheduled for September 18th, as we all know, until after the presidential election. The judge says he argues the adjournment is necessary to provide adequate time to assess and pursue appellate options in the event this court denies his pending criminal procedure law, and to avoid the potential politically prejudicial impact that a public sentencing could have on him and his prospects in the upcoming election. He goes on further and, by the way, signs this letter where he ultimately makes this decision, saying this is not a decision the court makes lightly, but is the decision which is in the court's view, best advances the interests of justice. Jonathan.
Yeah, it's a sort of.
He had to do so because the Supreme Court backed Trump, number one. Number two, he's being sued by Trump. Number three, there's very likely, a direct correlation between the Democratic Party and the conviction. We'll leave it at that.
Sort of an ironic passage because many of us questioned the rush to have these trials and proceedings before the election. And Merchan was largely unsympathetic with arguments coming from the Trump team that he was gagging the leading candidate for the presidency and pulling him into a courtroom for a long trial when he was supposed to be out on the campaign trail. So it's a different tenor coming out in this letter than the one that that was previously heard in court. I think that he's making the right decision. This is going to be a historic decision either way, but more importantly, he knows that every part of his decisions on these issues will be reviewed jot for jot by the appellate court and possibly the Supreme Court. And so he's going to take more time, try to get it right, and try not to have this clock running artificially set by the presidential campaign.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And
So, ladies and gentlemen, the court had to postpone because they don't want the Supreme Court. Every single live stream I do talks about the Supreme Court in the title. Why is that? Well, it's algorithmically friendly. We'll leave that at that. But it's not only algorithmically friendly, it is the truth. The Supreme Court has shielded Trump, has protected Trump, has saved Trump from an overt attempt at tarnishing his chances in November. Why has the Supreme Court continually backed Trump? Because Democrats have continually engaged in unconstitutional behavior. That's the fact. Justice Jackson and the liberal justices, all three of them, sided with Trump on the Colorado ban, to overturn the Colorado ban. Justice Jackson sided with Trump regarding the sentencing of January defendants, saying that it was egregious. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The same left-leaning, morally superior people want to use the state to go after Trump. Oh my God, they love state power and authority when they think that they're in control. When Trump's in control, it's resistance 3.0, 5.0. If Trump doesn't engage in reciprocal behavior, if he doesn't engage in reciprocity, we'll leave it at that. Not good for the future of the country. Let's listen to this, ladies and gentlemen.
Donald Trump's sentencing until November 26th, after the election. I'm curious, every step of the way throughout this trial, Judge Merchan has been, I would personally say, aggressive towards Donald Trump, not friendly to the defense. And then all of a sudden he's going to delay sentencing. I mean, from the outside, I'm looking at this going, what's the motivation? Clearly, every time Donald Trump's been indicted or they've gone after him, his poll numbers and fundraising have gone up. And Merchan has seemed very political. Was this a political calculation by Merchan?
I mean, it seems to me that he's in a pickle, right? Judge Merchan's in a pickle. What do? I sentence someone who's running right now, the forerunner. He will probably be elected president. I sentence him before he gets elected. When the Supreme Court came down with a case that pretty much invalidates the entire state court case,
right,
all of the evidence, how do you do that? So, of course, there's going to be an appeal. The Supreme Court already said the evidence you used in this case, Prosecutor Alvin Bragg, cannot be used against a former president.
Because of presidential immunity.
They can't even use the evidence, ladies and gentlemen. They cannot use the evidence. Okay? They can't even use the evidence that they gave the jury because he was in the Oval Office. He was president. But see, this is the thing. Democrats realize that the country is moving away from left-leaning ideology. They realize this. The only thing keeping the Democratic Party afloat is a virtual monopoly on media narrative. That's it. Most people don't adhere to far left ideology. Most people aren't offended by, the most minute things. Most people want a great economy and they want an anti-war foreign policy. Okay, most people don't like censorship. Democrats, in a very petulant and sheepish manner. Oh, well, there was no censorship on Twitter. It was guidelines. And the Federal Bureau worked with the then a private company. They were just trying to help a private company. I mean, they know. You think they're stupid? No, they're very intelligent. They're very petulant people can also be very intelligent, and they try to justify the indefensible. They try to defend the indefensible. That's why when you read like really, really intelligent writers of the Washington Post or New York Times, they're very intelligent, they're very eloquent, and oftentimes they try to justify the indefensible. And so you saw that when they shut down economic activity. Well, all the experts are saying, so the experts can be wrong. So what? There's always a very simple rebuttal to the very vapid propaganda spin from very intelligent people. But anyway, let's continue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at then is a situation where Judge Merchan's probably saying, well, if I sentence him, that's not going to work. And if I wait, at least we'll see what's going to happen.
Right.
And, he'll probably, and anyone who read the Supreme Court decision should just reverse.
Yeah, it's a bad legal decision, which will probably be one on appeal at some level.
Sure.
I also think that Merchan's a political character, and and at some point you have to look at the political calculation as well. I think he did.
Yeah.
And go, wow, this will help Donald Trump if I sentence him.
Well,
Probably. We'll never know at this point. But
yeah, we'll never know. But I mean, it certainly couldn't hurt Donald Trump, because it would be really obstruction of justice at this point. And it would really be election interference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Rebecca Rosewood, thank you so much for being.
And then you have the economy, ladies and gentlemen, which is heading towards a recession, likely a market crash before the recession. I think we're going to have probably, because of Harris's policies, because of two things, the price controls and the another wonderful policy, the taxes on unrealized capital gains. So you own a property, you own, I don't know, whatever, you own something valuable, you haven't sold it, a stock, but you're going to pay taxes even though you haven't sold it. You pay capital gains when you sell something, normally, okay? And now it's all theoretical, because they just can't look in the mirror and say, oh, we caused inflation. So it has to be, let's tax the you-know-what out of people. And then they fall back, well, it's people who are making $30 billion. Yeah, and what do you think those people then do? They downsize, they cut costs, they slash workforce. It's like, who do you think knows more about the economy? Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Elizabeth Warren, or billionaires? Who do you think knows more? Who are you going to deceive? The people voting for AOC and Elizabeth Warren, or the billionaires? Who do you think is more likely susceptible to deception? Okay? That's why when they can't admit that with Trump we had a great economy, record low poverty, record highs in household median income, a low inflation, low interest rates. That's the thing. Low interest rates, low inflation. You're paying less for a car loan. Do people on the far left, do they get car loans? Do they pay mortgage? The mortgage rates are double. I mean, it's almost as if they don't experience the same things we all experience. They're actively, consistently pushing for economic policies that hurt the quote-unquote working class they claim to care so much about.
In the meantime, I want to bring in E.J. Antoni, Heritage Foundation Research Fellow and economist. E.J., talk to me about the data this morning. A healthy normalization or an extreme slowdown of this labor market?
Oh, Taylor, I think anemic is the only word you can use to describe the support. Not only did we see another round of huge downward revisions, that means that basically half of the job growth in this report were jobs we literally thought we already had. But on top of that, look at July's number. It's now under 90,000 in terms of jobs added after those revisions. So things are definitely slowing down, and much slower than you could possibly consider to be a healthy labor market.
EJ, there's a group of people, camp, if you will, that is saying we're already in recession. When you talk about those revisions, not only for this month, but for last month's report, which was already a bad report, people are looking at manufacturing and saying those jobs are down. Another month that we're seeing that. We talk to Democrats on this show who will ultimately say, oh, manufacturing jobs have Joe Biden has created a ton of them. These are like chip stocks and tech jobs that they're saying are out in the future. They're booking them now. So they do bizarro math when it comes to the labor market altogether. But are you in that camp that says this is indeed a recession, even if not a textbook definition?
Well, Jackie, those folks touting the manufacturing numbers aren't even including another 100,000 jobs, which still have to be subtracted. We already got that info out of the annual benchmark revision, so we know that downward revision is coming. It just hasn't actually.
These downward revisions, by the way, always take place after all of the headlines. So you'll see like, oh, inflation. Job numbers, and then it's better than expected, yay! And then they're like, oh, wah, wah, wah. It's revised. Actually, it was not as good as, but it was always like a month later. So Democrats or Harris or Biden get the public relations spin initially.
Been put into the numbers yet. So manufacturing is clearly down. That sector is clearly in recession itself, whether you look at the purchasing manager indexes or you look at the surveys from the different regional Federal Reserve banks. That sector has been declining literally for 2 years now. In terms of the broader economy, though, I think there's a very strong likelihood we're eventually going to backdate a recession to right around this time.
Wow. EJ, on Jobs Day, my first stop is the BLS website. My second stop is your X feed because I want to see what data you've dug into. And one of the pieces that's really disturbing is part-time jobs and full-time jobs. If you look at this past month, the net jobs, all of the net jobs were part-time jobs, EJ. What does that mean for the consumer?
Well, Brian, unfortunately, it means the consumer is going to continue to be extremely strapped going forward because they are losing their full-time jobs and having to replace them with at least one, but typically more than one, part-time jobs. And sadly, this last month is not simply an isolated incident. It's part of a broader, longer trend where we have been losing these full-time jobs, over 1 million in the last year, and replacing them entirely with part-time ones. So again, it's not a good sign. And by the way, it's also a very common practice for businesses to do this, to shift away from full-time employment and towards part-time employment as we head into a recession.
Right. So there's a school of thought that says, well, interest rates are they're not too high. They're actually appropriate when you look at corporate profits. Corporate profits are so high they justify the high interest rates. And it's like, well, what happens in a recession, or what happens when corporate profits decline? What happens when, unfortunately, there's a market crash, stock market collapse? Then what? Then you lower interest rates. Then what happens? Da, na, 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 na. Oh, inflation goes up. Oh, that's why interest rates are high to begin with, because Democrats said, oh, inflation is temporary. They're very smart, but nothing they say actually pans out.
In that vein, what do you make of some of the data points we're hearing that all of the job gains are going to foreign-born workers, none of them to native-born Americans?
Well, Taylor, on net balance, that's certainly true. Now, I do want to point out something about the numbers that were on the screen earlier. If you're only looking at the change from July to August, we have to keep in mind this is not a seasonally adjusted data set. In other words, every August, you always see a plunge in native-born employment. That's not unusual. Now, was this one particularly large? Yes, that is true. I think the more worrying part is, again, like the part-time versus full-time employment, this is part of a broader, longer trend where native-born Americans have made literally no progress in terms of employment in the last 5 years. In other words, there are fewer native-born Americans employed today than before the pandemic. All of the job gains on net have gone to foreign-born workers. And by the way, the BLS admits on their website that that category includes an unknown number of illegal aliens. We can only surmise, given the huge influx of those illegal aliens that we have seen under the Biden-Harris administration, that they are continuing to make up a larger and larger portion of this workforce and therefore displacing some low-skilled American workers.
Well, we appreciate your data points, EJ Antoni, on important jobs days like.
I'm right now, as you know, in
I want to bring you in because your former boss.
Then they say, well, interest rates, you have to cut interest rates. Well, like I said, you cut interest rates, more money goes into an already overvalued market, which the collapse would be even worse. And inflation goes up.
Boss, former President Trump, was at the Economic Club of New York yesterday, Steve, and he laid out a bunch of policy ideas, less regulation, more energy production. He's going to kill 10 regulations for every one that is put into place. He doesn't want to tax tips, et cetera, et cetera. He really kind of laid out that blueprint, Steve, and we haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah. Well, let me just add one thing to what Joni was saying. I agree with her, but I would add that, if you look at the numbers, we're in a soft manufacturing recession right now, too. Manufacturing. What really bothers me about the shape of the economy is the makers of the economy, the people in construction and manufacturing and transportation and warehousing. Those numbers have been stagnant or negative for the last few months. Whereas, again, where are the jobs? Anything attached with government. Now, I'm not going to say that we are in a recession right now. We're headed to a recession. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But remember, economists have been very wrong about that for the last year and a half. But I will say this, if we do go into a recession, then we're really screwed because Biden is already running $2 trillion deficits. So what's the government going to do? Run $3 trillion?
You can't. So after shutting down economic activity, he's right. He's so right. What are you supposed to do? You're going to cut interest rates and then add more fiscal stimulus monetary stimulus? How can you add more monetary stimulus or even fiscal stimulus? How can you cut interest rates when you've already done so and you had to raise interest rates because inflation was rampant? But now, what happens if you have a stock market collapse and a recession and major companies going bankrupt? Then what happens? How do you stimulate an economy that you've already tanked, which was a self-induced wound 4 years ago? You can't just simply pump 12, 13, 14 trillion dollars every 4 years into an economy, because that will lead to complete financial bankruptcy. So then what do?
$1 trillion deficits? I mean, we're really in a hole because of the financial mismanagement. In terms of Trump's speech last night, I mean, Tomas worked with Trump very closely. I thought Tomas, he knocked it out of the park. I thought he hit all the key buttons, punched all the key buttons. We got to produce more American energy. We have to get regulation down. I fell out of my chair laughing yesterday when Kamala Harris said, we're going to cut the red tape for small business. I'm like, what? This is a president who's added so many more regulations on business than any other president in history, and now they're saying they're going to cut red tape. So we have a real challenge ahead of ourselves. I pray we don't go into a recession, but if we do, it's only going to make a bad situation with our fiscal situation even worse.
Yeah, Tomas.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't see a larger contrast here, I think, between the two candidates, which is unusual, how extreme.
Have you heard of
they are? Usually they fight for the same middle ground, essentially, to get all the voters, but they're so different. I think, Harris is going to basically tax her way now out of this weak economy, which is absurd in my view, relative to Trump, who's going to, try to stimulate this weak economy. I think the Harris people are, both her and her advisors have this weird view that there's a zero-sum game between business and labor, essentially, where business is the job creator and paying for job. It's like saying if you're selling your home, you don't want a lot of home buyers around. It's kind of crazy. So they had this view that also gets therefore implemented in these strange policies where they're pro-workers but basically hammering down on everyone who pays the worker.
Joel Schulman, a lot of these policies that the former president laid out yesterday would be music to investors' ears, Joel. He talked about lowering the corporate tax rate to 15%. It's currently sitting at 21% if companies operate and manufacture their goods and services within the United States. On the other side, he did talk about tariffs, which that's a kind of a mixed bag of opinion there, Joel. But he talked about the fact that there are ways to strengthen the U.S. economy, and he would do it on day one.
Yeah, right. Well, so we have the tax issue, and you know there's several taxes we have to consider. One is certainly at the federal rate, but federal level. But we also have to recognize that many of the states have been imposing quietly these additional taxes. For example, the state of Massachusetts has put on a 4% surtax to millionaires, and California has put on a tax on housing. And what happens is these additional taxes weigh in heavily, not only for people who are moving from point A to point B, but also to those who also the ones who tend to be the business owners who are hiring people. And so by taxing them more, you're giving money that they might otherwise use for hiring additional workers, and you're giving to the government that might choose to spend it on government spending.
So you increase the minimum wage, for example, for McDonald's or fast food chains, and then they cut hours or they just lay off people. So none of these policies actually work. You'll never get Democrats looking at an impoverished area and saying, well, how can we bring jobs? They'll say, oh, well, you know, raise the minimum wage. Well, why don't you focus on bringing jobs to that area? Manufacturing jobs, for example. Trump did that during his presidency.
And so we're seeing a reallocation of the flows of capital. I would argue that it's most efficient to go directly from the business owners to the employees and help grow economy. Allow them to invest back into their inventories. Allow them to invest back in their IT and their support mechanisms. Don't give the money to the government, which we know is going to be inefficient and ineffective in how they spend the money. So the tax issue is paramount to what's going on, and it will continue to be so. And we're seeing poor allocation of resources, and this has been a problem that we've had for the last few years.
That's interesting. You know, John Lonsky, I want to bring this to your attention. We're getting these new comments from Federal Reserve Bank of New York President John Williams, and he's making these comments. And the headline here is that the time has come to start these rate cuts. And you know, Nick Timrose in the Wall Street Journal reported about that this morning, that there's definitely thinking among voting officials that they feel that they need to, that they maybe have been behind the curve. All of this as we've got $35 trillion in debt right now.
Well, he's exactly right. The Federal Reserve's focus has shifted from worry about inflation to worry about the adequacy of economic growth. And these latest jobs numbers make it clear that the Fed will be cutting rates in September and for the rest of this year. And don't be surprised if, you know, a year from now, you're looking at a federal funds rate of about 3.38%, if not lower. Interest rates are headed lower. They've got to go lower to prevent this economy from going into a deep and long-lasting slide.
You know, Joni, one of the things that surprised me as I go through these numbers once again.
But then inflation goes back up. So that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Is the earnings story, because these average hourly earnings, that month-to-month number is a lot hotter than expected, stronger, and then the average year-over-year number for the earnings is stronger. Does that jive with what you're seeing in your data?
It surprises me as well, Cheryl, because what we're seeing is that employers have kind of put a pause on increasing wages. We are not in a very competitive job market that would drive up wages. And we're also not struggling with recruiting and getting people to work. We're at a point where we're starting to see more or actually less jobs. We saw the JOLTS report come out. It was revised down again. We're down to 7.7 million jobs in the U.S. and unemployment starting to climb. So I am surprised by that number. I'm not seeing that, on the front lines of employment with employers. I think they're just holding steady. Now, I will say employers are very focused on retention. They may not be hiring right now, but they certainly are trying to retain the workers that they do have. I think this uncertainty is making them
So the economy is on thin ice. That's basically what you're hearing.
Okay, let's get right to former Labor Secretary nominee Andy Puster. Andy, more and more you cannot trust what Biden administration officials say. They talk like propagandists. We've never seen it this bad, their top spin. This bad jobs report is bad for Kamala Harris. But the White House and Kamala Harris both say that the U.S. is, quote, moving in the right direction. That July number revised down is the worst in nearly 4 years.
Yeah, if you look at June's number was revised down in this recent report by 43% from what they originally said it was. So it's almost half of.
So look at all of those revisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of the past, the last 5 job reports, they've been revised downward. And it's just unbelievable.
Of what they claimed. And July's numbers was revised down 22%. These are massive reductions, and the Fed, the financial markets, react to the initial numbers that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Labor, comes out with, and they're reacting to numbers that are nowhere close to reality. And even to tie them in a little bit to your earlier interview about immigration, this last month we added 635,000 jobs for people that were immigrants to the United States, and we lost 1.3 million jobs for native-born Americans. So those 500,000 part-time jobs that we added went to immigrants, and the about 500,000 full-time jobs we lost, those were Native Americans. So this is a terrible report once you get down into the substance.
I mean, let's go through it again. We're in a job slowdown. The manufacturing sector, the second worst performance in 3 years. Biden has only created 147,000 manufacturing jobs after the economy clawed back jobs from the pandemic shutdowns. Biden tweeted out he only created 6 million jobs. Look at that. Not the 16 million he and Kamala Harris have been claiming. That's an overstatement of 10 million jobs. He's below Trump in job creation. Trump created 6.7 million new jobs in his first 3 years. Now, there's also this, Andy.
Biden only benefited from states resuming economic activity or opening up their economies. That's it. He did nothing to actually create any jobs. Trump, on the other hand, did.
You're going to hear Biden admit the Inflation Reduction Act should not have been called that. He's saying, no, we should have called it something else. By the way, it did not reduce inflation. Penn Wharton says it cut inflation maybe by 1/10 of a point. Watch this.
The most significant climate change law ever. And by the way, it is a $369 billion bill. It's called the, we should have named it what it was.
You know,
So, ladies and gentlemen, look, you have President Trump. He is on his way to victory. I just don't see the stock market alone will likely, unfortunately, I don't want this to happen, but likely collapse if media continues to say, oh, well, Harris is going to defeat Trump, that the stock market will be petrified. Then you'll have jobs, you'll have companies going bankrupt, companies laying off workers even more so than they are. It'll be terrible for the economy. It'll cement Trump's victory, but it'll be terrible for we've had 4 years of mismanagement, so economic mismanagement, but we are on thin ice in terms of the economy. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Be back tomorrow. Definitely hit subscribe. See you tomorrow, everybody. Thank you so very, very much for all the kind words and your support. I will see you tomorrow, everyone. Thank you. Huge, huge victory, by the way, in the Supreme Court. Thank you. Or because